You're in the wrong line, sweetheart. Economy is back there. Those 7 words were the last mistake he ever made at that airport. Imagine standing at the gate, holding a first-class ticket you worked 20 years to afford, only to have a smug agent threaten to call the police because he doesn't believe you belong there. He thought he was protecting the flight. He didn't realize he was blocking the woman who literally owned the jet. What happens when arrogance meets ownership? You're about to find out. This is the story of the gate agent who picked a fight with the wrong CEO and the brutal karma that followed. The fluorescent lights of JFK's Terminal 4 hummed with a low-grade anxiety that seemed unique to international travel. It was a Tuesday evening, the pre-holiday rush beginning to curdle the air with tension. At Gate 42B, the display board announced the flight to Zurich, a route frequented by bankers, diplomats, and the quietly wealthy. Standing behind the podium was Greg Miller. Greg was 45, wore a uniform that was starched to the point of cardboard stiffness, and possessed a hairline that was retreating almost as fast as his patience. He didn't view himself merely as a gate agent. He considered himself the first line of defense against chaos. In Greg's world, there was an order to things. People belonged in boxes. Businessmen in suits went to the left. Backpackers and families went to the right. He had a sixth sense for upgrades. He could spot a fake first-class passenger from 50 feet away. Or so he told himself. The queue for Group 1 First Class and Diamond Medallion members was short. A few men in bespoke charcoal suits looked at their watches, tapping leather loafers on the carpet. Then Dr. Serafina Sterling joined the line. Serafina was a striking woman, tall and dark-skinned, wearing a casual but impeccably cut beige trench coat over a cream cashmere sweater. She wore comfortable travel joggers and expensive sneakers. Her hair pulled back in a practical, elegant bun. She didn't look like the bankers. She didn't look like the diplomats. To Greg, peering over his spectacles, she looked like someone who had wandered away from the economy line, perhaps looking for a restroom or a trash can. She approached the scanner phone in hand, the QR code for her boarding pass bright on the screen. She moved with a fluid confidence that Greg immediately misread as entitlement. "Excuse me, miss," Greg said, his voice projecting just loud enough for the business travelers behind her to hear. He didn't look up from his computer screen at first, holding up a hand to stop her. "This is the priority lane. General boarding for Group 4 through 9 will begin in 20 minutes. Please step aside." Serafina paused. She blinked, pulling her phone back slightly. "I know. I'm in Group 1. Greg finally looked up. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that was more of a baring of teeth. He looked her up and down, taking in the sneakers, the lack of visible designer logos, the casual demeanor. "Miss," he said, dropping the volume to a patronizing whisper that was somehow more offensive than shouting. "Group 1 is for first-class passengers and diamond status members only. If you have an economy ticket, you need to wait for your zone. You're blocking the flow." "I have a first-class ticket," Serafina said calmly. She extended her phone again. "If you just scan—" "I don't need to scan it to know it's going to beep red," Greg interrupted, leaning over the podium. "Look, it happens all the time. People try to sneak on early to get overhead bin space. I get it, but not on my flight. Step aside, please. Sir, you can come forward." He tried to wave the man behind her, a heavy-set guy in a navy suit, forward. The man looked uncomfortable, shifting his briefcase from one hand to the other. Serafina didn't move. She planted her feet. The air around her seemed to drop a few degrees. My name is Dr. Sterling. I am booked in seat 1A. Scan the boarding pass. Greg let out a dramatic sigh, the kind reserved for toddlers who refuse to eat their peas. He shook his head, looking at the line of impatient passengers as if seeking their sympathy. Can you believe this? His eyes seemed to say. Ma'am, I am going to ask you one last time to step away from the podium before I call security. You are disrupting a federal flight procedure. Seat 1A is highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. Serafina repeated, her voice hardening. Based on what variable exactly? Based on the manifest. Greg lied. He hadn't even checked the name on the manifest for 1A yet. He just assumed. Now move. Serafina took a step closer to the podium. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't making a scene. She was terrifyingly calm. Scan the ticket, Greg, or get your supervisor. Greg's face flushed a blotchy red. He hated being challenged, especially by someone he had already mentally filed under doesn't belong. He snatched the scanner gun from its cradle. Fine. When it beeps red, you go to the back of the line. And if you argue, then you're not flying at all today. He aimed the red laser at her phone screen with aggressive speed. Beep, beep. The light on the turnstile turned green. The small screen on Greg's console flashed 1A, Sterling S, /first class. For a second, silence hung heavy in the air. The heavy-set man behind Serafina cleared his throat. Greg stared at the screen. It was a glitch. It had to be. Maybe she had manipulated the screenshot. People did that now, didn't they? Photoshop machines acting up. Greg muttered, resetting the console. That didn't register right. It turned green, Serafina pointed out. I'm boarding. She moved to step through. Greg physically stepped out from behind the podium, blocking the narrow jetway entrance with his body. I said hold on, Greg snapped. The veneer of customer service had completely cracked. You're not getting on this plane until I verify this manually. I need to see ID and the credit card used to book this. Now. The passengers behind were grumbling now. Come on, let her through, someone muttered. It scanned green, buddy. Greg ignored them. He was committed now. If he let her through, he lost. And Greg Miller did not lose to people like her. Serafina looked at the man blocking her path. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. She reached into her bag a beat-up leather tote that Greg probably assumed was from a discount store, though it was actually a vintage pilot's bag from the 1940s, and pulled out her passport. She handed it to him. Greg snatched it. He flipped it open, scanning the photo and the name. Serafina Sterling, he typed furiously into his terminal, looking for any reason to deny boarding. Invalid payment. Flagged for security. Anything. The system says the ticket was purchased. Yesterday. Greg said, his eyes narrowing. A last-minute one-way first-class ticket to Zurich, purchased with a corporate good. Is that a crime? Serafina asked. It's a red flag for credit card fraud. Greg declared triumphantly. He looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. It fits the profile. Stolen corporate card numbers used for high-value flights. I can't let you board until we verify the card holder is actually authorized. I am the card holder, Serafina said. It's my company. Sure it is, Greg scoffed. And I'm the King of England. What company? Sterling Logistics, Sterling Consulting. Sterling Aerospace, Serafina corrected him. Greg froze for a split second, the name sounding vaguely familiar, but his ego bulldozed over the memory. Never heard of it. Probably a shell company. Look, miss. Sterling, I'm going to have to hold your passport and ticket. You need to step to the side area. I'm calling the airport police to verify the transaction with the bank. You're going to call the police because I bought a ticket. I'm calling the police because I suspect fraud, Greg said, raising his voice so the onlookers would understand he was the hero here. And because you're being belligerent. I haven't raised my voice once, Serafina observed. You, however, are shouting. Step aside. Greg pointed a shaking finger toward a row of plastic chairs against the far wall. Now. Serafina didn't move toward the chairs. She looked at the display board, then out the window at the aircraft. It was a sleek, massive bird, the new LX900 series. A beautiful piece of engineering. Greg, she said softly, I suggest you look at the screen one more time. Look at the notes attached to the passenger record. There should be a VIP or CIP tag. I don't need to look at anything, Greg snapped. He picked up the landline phone on his desk and punched in a code. Yeah, this is Miller at 42B. I need a couple of officers down here. I've got a passenger refusing to comply with gate agent instructions, possible fraudulent ticket. Yeah, she's uncooperative. He hung up and crossed his arms. They're on their way. You wanted to fly. Now you're going to have a chat with the NYPD. The line of passengers was now stagnant. The boarding process had completely halted. Hey! A man in a red polo shirt shouted from further back in the line. Some of us have connections to make. She scanned in, let her go. Sir, stay back or you'll be denied boarding too. Greg barked, sweat beading on his forehead. He felt the situation spiraling, but he couldn't back down. If he backed down now, he looked weak. He had to be right. She had to be a fraud. Serafina sighed. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Who are you calling? Greg demanded. Put the phone away. I'm calling the one person who can explain this to you since you won't listen to me, Serafina said, holding the phone to her ear. Hello. Yes, it's Serafina. I'm at the gate. 42B. Yes, he's stopping me. He thinks I stole the credit card. No, I'm not joking. Can you come up? You're already in the cockpit. Great. Thanks, Captain. She hung up. Greg laughed, a harsh barking sound. Who was that, your boyfriend? You think calling someone is going to help you? That was Captain David Halloway, Serafina said, putting her phone in her pocket. The pilot of this aircraft. Greg rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. Right. You have the pilot on speed dial. Lady, you are digging this hole deeper by the second. Impersonating a personal connection to flight crew is a federal offense if you're trying to manipulate security protocols. I'm not impersonating anyone, she said. At that moment, 2 Port Authority police officers came jogging down the terminal concourse. They looked annoyed to be called for a gate dispute. What's the problem here? The older officer asked, his hand resting casually near his belt. Officer. Greg stepped forward, his posture changing instantly to one of deferential victimhood. This passenger is refusing to step aside. She has a suspicious ticket, high-value, last-minute corporate card, and when I asked for verification, she became hostile. She's blocking the boarding process. The officer turned to Serafina. Ma'am, is this true? I have a valid ticket, Serafina said. He scanned it. It turned green. He refused to let me board because he doesn't believe I can afford it. He accused me of fraud. I didn't say she couldn't afford it. Greg lied quickly. I said the transaction was flagged. Flagged by whom? Serafina asked. The system turned green. The officer looked at Greg. Did the system flag it, or did you? Greg stammered. I used my discretion. It fits a profile. A profile, Serafina repeated dryly. Ma'am, I need to see your ID and boarding pass, the officer said. Serafina nodded and motioned to Greg, who was still clutching her passport like a prize. "He has it." The officer took the passport from Greg. He looked at it then at Serafina. "Dr. Sterling, yes. And the ticket, first-class seat 1A. The officer looked at Greg. "If the machine scanned green, what is the probable cause for the stop, son? It's the behavior." Greg grasped at straws. "She was arrogant, and then she claimed to know the pilot. She's making up stories to intimidate staff." "I didn't make up a story," Serafina said. "I just spoke to him." "Bull!" Greg shouted, losing his cool again. "You did not speak to Captain Halloway." Suddenly the door from the jetway, the one behind the podium leading to the plane, burst open. A rush of cold air hit the gate area. Standing there was a man in a pristine pilot's uniform, 4 stripes on his shoulders, his hat tucked under his arm. He was tall, silver-haired, and looked furious. This was Captain David Halloway. Greg's jaw dropped. "Captain, we have a situation here I was just handling." Captain Halloway ignored Greg completely. He walked straight past the podium, past the police officers, and stopped in front of Serafina. To the shock of everyone in the terminal, the captain didn't ask for her ID. He didn't ask her to step back. He bowed his head slightly and extended his hand. "Dr. Sterling," the captain said warmly, though his eyes were steely when he glanced at Greg. "I am so incredibly sorry for this delay. We were waiting for you to do the pre-flight checks on the new avionics system." Greg felt the blood drain from his face. Pre-flight checks." Serafina shook the captain's hand. "It's fine, David. Greg here thinks I stole the company credit card." Captain Halloway turned slowly to face Greg. The look on his face was one of absolute withering disbelief. "You think—" Halloway started his voice low and dangerous. "You think the owner of the aircraft stole the credit card?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the babies in the terminal seemed to stop crying. Greg blinked. The owner," Greg, Serafina said, her voice smooth as silk, but cutting like a razor. "You didn't recognize the company name Sterling Aerospace." "That's okay, but you really should have checked the aircraft registration." She pointed out the window at the gleaming fuselage of the plane. "Go ahead. Look at the registration number on the tail, and look at the name painted right under the cockpit window." Greg turned his legs, feeling like jelly. He looked through the glass. The plane's registration code was N-1982-SS, and right under the cockpit window in elegant cursive script were the words, "The Spirit of Serafina." Greg turned back around, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "You," he squeaked. "Me," Serafina confirmed. "I designed the LX900 engine. My company leases this plane to your airline. Technically, Greg, I'm your landlord." The silence that had fallen over Gate 42B was broken by a sound that Greg Miller would hear in his nightmares for years to come. The sound of 100 smartphones recording video simultaneously. The crowd, previously annoyed and tired, had sensed the shift in power like sharks sensing blood in the water. They had their phones up. They had heard the captain. They had seen the name on the plane. The narrative had shifted from disruptive passenger to incompetent tyrant gets owned in the span of 10 seconds. Greg stood there, his face a mask of pale shock. His brain was trying to reboot, attempting to find a logical pathway where he was still in charge, still the authority figure, still the man who decided who flew and who stayed. But the pathway didn't exist. "The owner," Greg stammered again, his voice cracking. He looked at the police officers, hoping for some kind of solidarity. But the system, the credit card." The older officer, whose name tag read Officer Davis, let out a long, heavy sigh. He unhooked his thumb from his belt and stepped away from Serafina, creating a respectful distance. He looked at Greg with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Son," Officer Davis said, his voice loud enough for the first few rows of the crowd to hear. "You called us down here for a priority boarding dispute involving the woman who built the damn plane." "I didn't know," Greg shrilled, his defensive instincts finally kicking in. "How was I supposed to know? She doesn't look like an airline owner. She's wearing sweatpants. She has a generic bag." "The profile—" "Stop talking," Serafina said. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her voice cut through Greg's panic like a diamond cutter through glass. "Every time you open your mouth, you are adding another 0 to the lawsuit I am currently drafting in my head. She doesn't look like an owner. What does an owner look like, Greg? Tell me, do they look like you?" Greg opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked around. The passengers were laughing now. Some were jeering. "Let her board, loser," someone shouted from the back. "Check the name on the plane again," another voice mocked. Captain Halloway stepped forward, his physical presence looming over the smaller gate agent. "Greg, is it? You are currently delaying my flight. You are harassing my VIP passenger, and you are holding onto the passport of Dr. Sterling. Give it back, now." Greg's hand, trembling visibly, extended the passport. Serafina took it, tucking it calmly into her vintage bag. "Officer," Serafina said, turning to the police, "am I free to board, or do you need to arrest me for credit card fraud based on Mr. Miller's keen detective work?" "Ma'am, you are free to go," Officer Davis said, tipping his cap. "And on behalf of the Port Authority, I apologize for the inconvenience. We were given misleading information by the airline staff." "Thank you, officer." Serafina turned to Greg. She leaned in close so only he and the captain could hear. "I'm going to board my aircraft now. You are going to finish boarding this flight. You will do it politely. You will not harass another single soul. And when I land in Zurich, I'm going to make a phone call to the CEO of this airline. His name is Richard. We play golf on Sundays. I suggest you update your LinkedIn profile while the plane is in the air." She turned and walked through the gate door. Captain Halloway threw Greg one last look of disgust, a look that said, "You are a disgrace to the uniform," and followed her down the jetway. Greg was left standing alone at the podium. The adrenaline was crashing, replaced by a cold, sickly dread. He looked up. The line of passengers was staring at him. "Well?" The heavy-set man who had been behind Serafina stepped up. "Are you going to scan my ticket, or do you need to call the FBI first?" Greg swallowed hard. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the scanner. "Boarding. Boarding Group 1, he whispered. "I can't hear you," someone yelled. "Boarding Group 1, Greg screamed, his voice breaking into a hysterical crack. He swiped the man's phone. It beeped green. He didn't look the man in the eye. He couldn't. As he worked mechanically scanning phones, he could feel the eyes of the other gate agents on him. His colleague, a younger woman named Sarah, who worked the adjacent gate, was watching him with wide eyes. She knew. Everyone knew. He had just tried to arrest the landlord. But Greg's ego was a resilient parasite. As the boarding continued, a dark, twisting thought began to form in his mind. She embarrassed me. He thought his shame curdling into anger. She set me up. She came here dressed like that on purpose. She wanted to make a fool of me. He wasn't sorry. He was vengeful. And he still had control over the flight manifest until the door closed. The transition from the chaotic, sterile terminal to the interior of the LX-900 was instant. The air inside the cabin was cooler, scented with a subtle hint of lavender and recycled ozone. The lighting was soft, shifting in hues of amber and blue, designed to reduce jet lag. Serafina stepped onto the plane and turned left. "Dr. Sterling, welcome back," the chief purser. A woman named Beatrice, who had flown with Serafina a dozen times, beamed at her. Beatrice was the best in the business, efficient, warm, and discreet. She took Serafina's coat immediately. "Good to see you, Beatrice." Serafina exhaled the tension of the gate, finally leaving her shoulders. "I apologize for the delay. We had a personnel issue upstairs." "We heard," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she guided Serafina to seat 1A. Captain Halloway radioed ahead. He said the gate agent tried to deny you because of the corporate card. Unbelievable. He tried to have me arrested, Beatrice. It was a whole production. Serafina sank into the seat. Seat 1A on the LX-900 wasn't just a seat. It was a suite. As the engineer who had overseen the interior design specs, Serafina knew every inch of it. The hand-stitched Italian leather, the walnut veneer console that hid the entertainment controls, the privacy partition that slid shut with a whisper-quiet pneumatic hiss. It was her sanctuary. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from Beatrice and looked out the window. She could see the jetway retracting slightly, the ground crew moving around the massive engines she had helped design. The Sterling Aerospace Titan V high-bypass turbofans. They were the most efficient engines in the commercial market. But recently, sensors on this specific aircraft, the Spirit of Serafina, had been sending back erratic data regarding fuel flow in the left engine during high-altitude cruising. The airline mechanics couldn't replicate it on the ground. They wanted to ground the plane for 2 weeks to strip the engine. Serafina had refused. She knew her engines. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a software calibration error in the new sensor array. But she needed to be on the flight to monitor the live data stream from the cockpit during the crossing to prove it. That's why she was here. That's why she had booked the last-minute ticket. She was here to save the airline millions of dollars in maintenance downtime. And Greg had almost stopped her because he didn't like her sweat pants. Captain Halloway's voice crackled over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 404 to Zurich. This is Captain Halloway. We apologize for the slight delay at the gate. We want to ensure all security protocols are met, even when they are overzealously applied. We have a special guest on board today, the lead engineer of this very aircraft, so you can rest assured you are in the safest hands possible. Flight time will be 7 hours and 40 minutes. Serafina smiled. David was a good man. But the plane didn't move. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The subtle hum of the APU auxiliary power unit was the only sound. The passengers in the back were starting to murmur. Usually once the door was closed, pushback was immediate. Serafina pressed the call button. Beatrice appeared instantly. "Why aren't we pushing back?" Serafina asked. "We've missed our slot." Beatrice looked frustrated. "It's the gate, Dr. Sterling. The paperwork hasn't been finalized. The final load sheet hasn't been sent to the cockpit." "Greg," Serafina said, the name tasting like ash. "Yes. He's claiming there's a discrepancy in the baggage count versus the passenger manifest. He refuses to release the flight until he manually recounts the bags in the system. The captain is shouting at him over the radio, but he's citing federal safety regulations." Serafina unbuckled her seatbelt. "He's doing this on purpose. He's trying to punish us." Dr. Sterling, you can't. I'm not going to get off the plane, Beatrice. I'm going to the cockpit. Serafina walked to the front office. Captain Halloway and his first officer. A sharp young man named Ryan were flipping switches looking furious. David, Serafina said, leaning into the cockpit. What is he doing? Halloway slammed his headset down on his leg. He's holding us hostage, Serafina. He says he suspects a bag was loaded for a passenger who didn't board. He's refusing to sign off on the weight and balance sheet. If we don't push back in 5 minutes, we lose our oceanic entry slot. We'll be stuck on the tarmac for 2 hours. He knows that, Serafina said, her eyes narrowing. He's trying to cost the airline money. He knows he's fired tomorrow, so he's burning the house down on his way out. I've called operations, Halloway said, but they can't override a gate agent on a security hold without a supervisor physically going down there, and the terminal manager is on a break. Serafina looked at the instrument panel. She looked at the communications array. David, patch me through to the gate. Serafina, I can't let a passenger talk to ground control. I'm not a passenger, she reminded him. I'm the lessor. And technically, until this plane disconnects from the jetway, I can speak to ground staff regarding the safety of my asset. Give me the headset. Halloway hesitated, then grinned. He handed her the heavy aviation headset. Serafina put it on. She pressed the ground talk button. Gate 42B, this is aircraft N-1982-SS. Come in. There was static, and then Greg's voice sounding smug and petty. Aircraft, this is Gate. We are still conducting a security reconciliation. Hold your position. Do not push. Greg, Serafina said, her voice echoing in the headset. This is Dr. Sterling. Silence on the other end. I know what you're doing, she continued. You think that by delaying the flight you're exerting some final scrap of power. You think you're inconveniencing me. But here is the reality. The data link on this aircraft is live. I am currently monitoring the APU fuel burn. Every minute we sit here, you are burning 400 pounds of jet fuel. That cost is logged, and since the delay is marked as ground staff discretion and not ATC or mechanical, that cost is deducted directly from your station's monthly performance bonus. She paused. She knew Greg cared about money. Furthermore, she added, improvising slightly but knowing the legalities, if we miss our oceanic slot, the airline faces a fine from Eurocontrol. That fine is roughly $25,000. When the investigation happens tomorrow, and it will happen, they will pull the tapes. They will see there was no baggage discrepancy. They will see you acted out of malice. And they won't just fire you, Greg. They will sue you for civil damages to recover the lost funds. You will lose your pension. You will lose your savings. You might even lose your house. She let that hang in the air. Sign the sheet, Greg. Release the brake, or spend the rest of your life paying for this tantrum. The static hissed for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Serafina held her breath. Halloway watched her, impressed. Then the printer in the center console whirred to life. The final load sheet began to print. Greg's voice came back, stripped of all arrogance, sounding small and defeated. Paperwork sent. You are cleared for pushback. Good choice, Serafina said. She took off the headset and handed it back to the captain. Let's go to Zurich. As she walked back to her seat, the plane lurched gently backward. They were moving. She sat down, buckling the strap, watching the terminal building slide away. She saw the window of Gate 42B. She saw a small, solitary figure standing in the window watching the massive machine leave him behind. Greg Miller had lost the battle. But Serafina knew men like him. He wouldn't just go quietly into the night. He would try to strike back one last time. She just didn't know how yet. As the plane taxied to the runway, Serafina pulled out her laptop. She had work to do. But first she opened a new email window. To Richard Sterling, CEO, Transatlantic Airways, subject incident at JFK/employment review of G. Miller. She began to type. But as the engines roared to life, pushing her back into the soft leather of seat one, she didn't realize that Greg was already making a call of his own. A call to a contact he had in Zurich Customs. If he couldn't stop her from leaving New York, he was going to make sure she had a hell of a time entering Switzerland. The flight to Zurich was smooth, the kind of flight pilots dream of. For 7 hours, the spirit of Serafina cut through the stratosphere like a silver arrow. Serafina spent the flight plugged into the aircraft's diagnostic port, monitoring the left engine. As she suspected, the vibration and fuel flow anomalies were phantom data ghosts in the machine, created by a faulty sensor calibration. She wrote the patch code somewhere over the Atlantic, sipping peppermint tea, while the rest of the cabin slept. When the wheels touched down on the tarmac at Zurich Airport, the sun was just beginning to rise over the Swiss Alps, painting the snow-capped peaks in hues of violet and gold. It was a beautiful morning. Serafina felt a sense of accomplishment. She had saved the engine, saved the schedule, and escaped the pettiness of JFK, or so she thought. As she disembarked, thanking Captain Halloway and the crew, she walked up the jet bridge, feeling refreshed. Zurich was usually a breeze, efficient, clean, precise. She had a car waiting to take her to the Sterling Aerospace European HQ. But as she approached the immigration control booths, she noticed something odd. Usually the fast-track lane for first-class passengers was empty. Today, 2 officers in the dark blue uniforms of the Swiss border guard Grenzwachtkorps were standing directly in front of the booth, their arms crossed. They weren't checking passports. They were waiting. Serafina approached the booth, her passport ready. "Guten Morgen," she said politely, handing over her document. The officer in the booth took it, scanned it, and frowned. He looked at his screen, then pressed a silent alarm button under his desk. The 2 officers standing outside the booth stepped forward, immediately flanking Serafina. "Dr. Sterling," the officer in the booth asked, his tone grave. "Yes." "Please step into the examination room to your left. There is a flag on your entry." A flag. Serafina felt a spark of irritation. "For what?" "Anonymous tip," the officer said, sliding her passport into a secure drawer. "Regarding the transportation of restricted industrial data and undeclared assets." Serafina's blood ran cold. Restricted data. Undeclared assets. These were serious accusations in Switzerland, a country that took banking and corporate secrecy very seriously. If she was suspected of corporate espionage or financial crimes, they could hold her for 48 hours without a lawyer. She looked at the officers, who called in this tip. "We cannot disclose that," the officer said. "Please, the room." As she was escorted into the sterile, windowless room, her mind raced back to JFK, to the gate, to the phone call Greg Miller must have made. He knew she was the owner of an aerospace company. He knew she was carrying a laptop full of proprietary engine schematics. All he had to do was call an anonymous tip line and say, "There's a woman on flight 404 carrying stolen industrial secrets." It was the perfect revenge. It didn't need to be true. It just needed to waste her time and humiliate her. For 3 hours, Serafina sat in that room. They searched her bag. They took her laptop away for forensic analysis. They questioned her about her company, her bank accounts, her reasons for travel. Serafina remained calm, but inside she was seething. This was Greg. It had to be. Finally, a senior officer entered the room. He was holding her laptop and her passport. He looked apologetic. "Dr. Sterling," he said, handing them back. "I apologize for the delay. We have verified your credentials with the U.S. Embassy and your local offices. It appears the tip was unfounded. Malicious, even." "Malicious," Serafina repeated, taking her things. "Officer, the call came from New York, didn't it? From a JFK terminal." The officer hesitated, then gave a slight nod. "It was traced to a public line at the airport. Do you know who would want to disrupt your travel?" Serafina stood up, smoothing her trench coat. A cold, hard smile touched her lips. "Yes, I believe I do. And I believe he just made the transition from fired to prosecuted." She walked out of the airport into the crisp Swiss air. She didn't go to her hotel. She didn't go to her office. She took out her phone and dialed Richard Sterling, the CEO of the airline. "Richard," she said when he answered, "it's Serafina. I'm in Zurich. I need you to pull the security footage from Gate 42B at JFK from 4 hours ago. Specifically, the landline at the podium. And Richard, get your legal team on the line. We're going to war." 2 days later, back in New York, Greg Miller was feeling good. He hadn't heard anything. No police at his door, no angry emails from management. He assumed Serafina had just been hassled in Zurich and let go, too busy being a big shot to chase him down. He figured he had gotten away with it. He had taught her a lesson about respecting the gate agent. He arrived at work on Thursday afternoon whistling. He swiped his badge at the employee entrance. Beep, beep. Access denied. Greg frowned. He swiped again. Access denied. "Must be the magnet strip," he muttered. He walked over to the security guard station. "Hey, Mike, badge is acting up. Can you buzz me in?" Mike, a guard. Greg had known for 5 years, didn't smile. He didn't even look at Greg. He looked down at a clipboard. "I can't let you in, Greg. You need to report to the administration building. HR wants to see you." Greg's stomach dropped. "HR what for?" "Just go, Greg." Greg walked the half-mile to the admin building, the spring in his step replaced by a trudge. "It's just a reprimand," he told himself. "Maybe a suspension. The union will protect me." "I followed protocol." She was suspicious. When he entered the conference room, he realized this wasn't a reprimand. Sitting at the head of the table was the terminal manager. Next to him was the HR director. And sitting across from them, looking relaxed and terrifyingly calm, was Serafina Sterling. But she wasn't alone. Next to her sat a man in a sharp suit, the airline's general counsel, and next to him sat 2 detectives from the NYPD. Greg stopped in the doorway. What is this?" "Sit down, Mr. Miller," the HR director said. Her voice was ice. Greg sat. The chair felt like an electric chair. "Mr. Miller," the general counsel began opening a file. "On Tuesday, you denied boarding to Dr. Sterling despite a valid ticket. You then delayed a transatlantic flight by 20 minutes based on a falsified baggage discrepancy. Is this correct?" I had suspicions," Greg stammered. "Safety first." "We pulled the logs," the lawyer said. "There was no baggage discrepancy. The system shows you manually overrode the ready status to hold. That delay cost us $18,000 in fuel and fees." "I was doing my job," Greg insisted. "Then there is the matter of the phone call. Serafina spoke up. She looked him dead in the eye. "The call to Zurich Customs, accusing me of corporate espionage." Greg paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." The NYPD detective leaned forward. He placed a piece of paper on the table. It was a call log. "We pulled the records from the gate phone, Greg," the detective said. "One outgoing international call to the Zurich airport tip line, time-stamped 10 minutes after Flight 404 departed. We also have voice recording from the Swiss authorities. They record all tip calls. It's your voice, Greg." Greg felt the room spinning. I was just... Making a false report of a crime is a Class A misdemeanor, the detective said. But doing it across international borders, involving federal aviation assets, that pushes it into federal territory. You filed a false report that detained a U.S. citizen and disrupted international commerce. "Mr. Miller," the HR director said, sliding a letter across the table. "You are hereby terminated for cause effective immediately. You will lose your pension eligibility. You are also permanently banned from flying on this airline." "But the union," Greg whispered. "The union reviewed the footage," the HR director said. "They declined to represent you. You harassed the owner of the aircraft, Greg. There is no union in the world that can save you from that." Greg looked at Serafina. He wanted to scream at her. He wanted to beg. But he saw no sympathy in her eyes, only a mirror reflecting his own smallness back at him. "You ruined my life," Greg whispered. "Over a ticket." "No, Greg," Serafina said, standing up. "You ruined your life. You ruined it the moment you decided that your ego was more important than your job. You ruined it when you judged me based on my appearance instead of my character. And you certainly ruined it when you tried to use the law as a weapon against an innocent person." She leaned in close, echoing the moment at the gate. "I told you, Greg. I'm the landlord, and I just evicted you." The detectives stood up. "Mr. Miller, please stand up and place your hands behind your back." As the handcuffs clicked onto Greg's wrists, he began to cry. Not silent tears, but ugly, heaving sobs of a man who realized too late that he wasn't the main character of the story. He was the villain who got caught. The walk from the administration building to the parking lot was the longest of Greg Miller's life, primarily because he wasn't walking it alone. He was being escorted by the 2 NYPD detectives, his hands cuffed behind his back, past the very terminal where he had reigned like a petty king for 15 years. The timing, as fate would have it, was cruel. It was shift change. Dozens of other gate agents, baggage handlers, and pilots were streaming out of the employee exit. People Greg had bullied. People he had lectured on protocol. People he had snitched on for being 2 minutes late. They stopped. They watched. Sarah, the young agent he had belittled just 2 days ago, was standing near the curb smoking a cigarette. She saw the cuffs. She saw the badge hanging loosely from the detective's hand. Greg's confiscated badge. Her eyes widened, but she didn't look sad. She looked relieved. She took a long drag of her cigarette and simply turned away, denying him even the dignity of an audience. "Watch your head," the detective said, guiding Greg into the back of the unmarked sedan. As the door slammed shut, sealing him inside the cage of his own making, Greg saw a black town car glide past. In the back seat, profile sharp against the tinted window, was Serafina Sterling. She wasn't looking at him. She was on her phone, likely closing another deal, likely building another empire. She had already moved on. Greg was a footnote in her day, a piece of debris removed from the runway. 6 months later, The courtroom was cold and smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. The karma Serafina had promised didn't come in the form of a lightning bolt. It came in the slow, grinding machinery of the legal system. Greg sat at the defense table wearing a suit that was now 2 sizes too big. Stress had eaten away at him. His hairline had receded further, leaving him looking older, hollowed out. The charges were severe. Filing a false report, harassment and a civil suit from Transatlantic Airways for tortious interference with business relations. His lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Henderson, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, had been blunt. They have the tapes, Greg. They have the call logs. They have the testimony of the airline CEO. You don't have a defense. You have a plea deal. The deal was brutal. 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service and restitution to the airline for the fuel costs and delay fees totaling $28,000. Greg didn't have $28,000. He had lost his job. He had lost his pension. His wife, tired of his anger and the sudden financial ruin, had moved to her sister's place in Jersey to think things over. "I'll take the deal," Greg whispered, and his voice a ghost of the booming baritone he used to use at Gate 42B. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on her nose, looked down at him. "Mr. Miller, I have reviewed the facts of this case. What stands out to me is not just the financial loss, but the malice. You used the security apparatus of our country systems, designed to protect us from terrorists, to settle a personal grudge because your ego was bruised. You wasted the time of the Swiss border guard, the NYPD, and the Port Authority." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. "You are a small man who was given a small amount of power, and you abused it to the fullest extent. I am accepting the plea, but I am adding a condition to your probation." Greg looked up, hopeful. Maybe she would be lenient. "You are hereby barred from employment in any position involving security transportation or customer service management for the duration of your probation. You need to learn humility, Mr. Miller. I suggest you find work that requires you to serve, not to command." The gavel banged. It sounded like the closing of a heavy door. The lunch rush at Burger Barn in Queens was in full swing. The smell of grease was thick enough to chew. The noise was deafening. Shouting customers, sizzling fryers, crying babies. "Order 42. I need a double with cheese, no pickles," the manager shouted. He was 22 years old, had acne scars, and wielded his power with the enthusiasm of a dictator. "Coming up," Greg muttered, scraping the grill. Greg Miller, the former gatekeeper of Terminal 4, the man who had once threatened to arrest a CEO, was now flipping burgers for minimum wage. His uniform was a bright, humiliating yellow polo shirt, stained with ketchup. He wore a paper hat. "Hey, old man, move it," the manager barked. "Fries are burning." I got it, Greg said, wiping sweat from his forehead. His back ached. His feet were swollen. Every day was a reminder of what he had lost. He missed the airport. He missed the clean uniforms. He missed the air conditioning. Most of all, he missed the feeling of being important. He walked to the counter to hand over a tray. Standing there was a customer, a tall, elegant black woman in a business suit. She was looking at her phone, checking emails. Greg froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. Was it her? Was it Serafina? The woman looked up. It wasn't Serafina. Just a stranger. But the fear that gripped Greg was real. He lived in constant terror of running into her, of her seeing him like this. "Here's your order," Greg mumbled, sliding the tray over. He didn't make eye contact. He couldn't. "Thanks," the woman said, taking the tray. She paused. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Greg lied. "Just wrong line of work." As he turned back to the scorching heat of the grill, the television in the corner of the restaurant was playing the news. And in business news today, Sterling Aerospace unveiled their new LX1000 green engine, promising to revolutionize eco-friendly travel. CEO Dr. Serafina Sterling announced the record-breaking contract with major European airlines. Greg looked up. There she was on the screen. She looked radiant, powerful, unstoppable. She was standing on a tarmac, shaking hands with dignitaries, the spirit of Serafina gleaming in the background. She hadn't just won. She had soared. Greg looked down at his spatula. He looked at the grease trap that needed cleaning. "Order 43, the manager screamed. "Miller, wake up." "Yes, sir," Greg said. "Right away, sir." He went back to work. He finally understood. He had spent his whole life thinking he was the one who decided where people belonged. He thought he could keep people like Serafina down. But gravity doesn't work that way. Some people are built to fly, and some people, through their own weight of arrogance and spite, are destined to stay on the ground, scraping the grease off the bottom of the world. He was in the right line now. He was finally exactly where he belonged. And that, my friends, is why you never judge a book by its cover, and you certainly never judge a passenger by their sweatpants. Greg Miller learned the hard way that true power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to bully. True power is quiet, it's confident, and sometimes it owns the very plane you're standing on. Serafina didn't just defeat Greg. She outclassed him. She showed that while arrogance might win a moment, integrity wins the war. Greg thought he was the gatekeeper, but he forgot that gatekeepers are just employees. The owners hold the keys. What did you think of Greg's punishment? Did the punishment fit the crime, or did he get off too easy for trying to ruin someone's life? And have you ever had a run-in with a power-tripping employee who needed a reality check? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We post new drama every week. Thanks for watching, stay humble and fly safe. See you in the next one.